Welcome, everyone, to the January 15th Eugene City Council work session. And I guess we all pause and embarrass him and say happy birthday to George Pollard.
Man of the hour.
Yeah.
49 number of times.
Did you sing the song earlier?
No, we actually didn't sing the song earlier.
We need some
camera crew.
embarrassment sparing.
Spare me that much pain on people watching on television.
I share my birthday.
Couldn't do that.
I share my birthday with Martin Luther King and Drew Brees.
All right.
All right.
George and I pinky swear that we wouldn't sing today.
Anybody,
so,
right? Yes. We don't want to start a
Thank you.
tradition of
Thank you.
That will be
That's
fine.
right.
Thank you.
It's called decorum.
All right, so the first thing we had on our agenda today was the work session on the Civic Stadium Business Plan Review, and as I understand it from the flurry of communications back and forth, there was some discussion about whether we weren't getting the cart before the horse in terms of discussing the business plans today before we have an actual offer of any funds to meet the criteria. Yes, George?
Well, I'll wait till you finish, Mayor, but I would like to speak to this.
Okay. So unless someone else has something different to say, my understanding from the communications I heard today was that council would be fine with, we were going to have the discussion today because we thought Councilor Zelenka was going to be out of town for a couple of weeks, but he isn't, so we have time to look at this in the future, and so we're putting that off until the 22nd is my understanding, unless somebody has an objection to that. And George, you want to respond to this? But he's got her hand up. Do you want? Because I saw that you were in support of that. So.
Well, I still want to speak to it.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think that in my email, which I don't know if everyone got a chance to read it or not, because they were flying all over the place this morning, I suggested that we wait till next Wednesday to do this because I'm aware of two other serious, reputable, experienced groups who are working night and day on presenting a proposal, and in this short time frame, they weren't able to make a presentation today. So, a credible presentation today, and there could be someone else out there that we don't even know about. I know of two, and there's possibly three. So I wouldn't mind if we wanted to ask, since the proposers are here, two of them, I wouldn't mind a short session, but I think we ought to talk about our contingencies. I think we still should have a discussion today about this since we're scheduled for, to discuss it. I'd like to say a few words about it, and I also included in my email that
Timer.
It's on.
Here, I'll share with you.
That
Could you put me in the queue too, Mayor, please?
I may make a motion next Wednesday for us to modify our conditions. I'm not going to do it today because I want to hear from these other people that are working on this. So I want to have a reason to make that motion, and I don't think I have a reason yet. So I'm going to save that till next Wednesday. But I would like to, since we're all gathered here, whether we choose to hear from the groups that are here today or not, I think we need to have a brief discussion at least about this, the conditions that we've imposed on ourselves. So I guess I'll just leave it at that for now.
We got Betty and Mike and Alice. Betty?
Thank you. First, if there are people here who wanted to speak to us, I think we should hear them today. And second, I'm concerned about the timeliness if the school board makes a decision before we have acted. And third, we talked about divesting from fossil fuels. I think we should divest from this requirement that people raise a lot of money before anything happens. Thank you.
Ready. And Mike.
My understanding of the motion that was passed, I guess this is a
It's
point
in
of...
front of you.
My understanding, excuse me, I guess what I'm asking is a point of order question, and I had them send it to me earlier today as well. Do we not need a motion to reconsider for us to have the discussion on any changes we would make to the motion we've already passed?
No.
I don't know whether you need a motion to
Motion.
reconsider, but the motion that you pass stays in place unless there's a motion to change that.
Because my reading of the motion we passed was that we would consider business plans once money was put into an escrow account or sufficient funds were guaranteed to the manager's satisfaction.
Let
Is that
me,
not the motion that passed?
Sarah, would you read the motion, please?
Yep, the final motion, Councilor Brown, seconded by Councilor Taylor, moved to direct the city manager to submit a purchase offer using park bonds for Civic Stadium property to the 4J School Board by December 3rd, 2013, with the offer contingent on other parties entering into an agreement with the city within 60 days, satisfactory to the city manager, that guarantees private funds for the cost of renovating, maintaining, and operating Civic Stadium. That was, oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. That's what the mistake was in my email. So that's the one that happened before the executive session, so I apologize. Submit a purchase offer using park bond funds for Civic Stadium property to the 4J School Board. It's,
I have it on my email here, if you like.
okay. All right, I apologize.
Ready to start over, Sarah?
I still have one apology ahead of me to have a hat trick.
Start over.
Okay.
Great stuff.
Take 3.
Move to direct the city manager to submit a purchase offer using park bond funds for Civic Stadium property to the 4J School Board by December 3rd, 2013, with the offer contingent on other parties, 1, entering into an agreement with the city within 60 days, satisfactory to the city manager, that guarantees private funds of not less than $5.5 million for the cost of renovating, maintaining, and operating Civic Stadium, and 2, submitting a business plan for Civic Stadium that is reviewed and approved by City Council.
Now, if I reviewed the thank you. If I reviewed the minutes there, my recollection of that conversation was really around the fact that the initial discussion was we didn't want to get stuck on the hook for the potential liability, and the manager defined for us what that would look like in terms of his level of assurance from the original motion. And then, as I recall, Alan added on towards the end the idea that, yes, we should look at a business plan too, and that's the motion that passed. So for me, there's a cart and horse, the way I read this motion and the way I understood it to be passed. So I would certainly be interested in discussing business plans for those folks who've stepped up and are serious about this financially.
So before I call on George Poling, and Alan, were you in the queue?
Nope.
No. And then back again, a second round to George
Thank you.
Brown. I wanted to say that, and I'll get Glenn to give us his opinion on this, but as I read this, what it says is you have to have these things in place before we will actually move forward with our proposal to 4J. And then it says, and you will have a business plan, but it doesn't put one in front of the other in the language of the motion, I don't believe.
And, of course, it's the council's motion, and so the council can interpret it differently, but my understanding of the motion was what you just said, Mayor, different than what you said, Mike. And part of the reason I say that is because shortly after the council adopted that motion, what we have been saying is that people would have until next Friday to get us the money in hand, but that the council conversation about a business plan couldn't wait until after that Friday. So that at least as I've thought about it, and when I was talking with John and Sarah, we had been thinking that the council would have a conversation about the business plan even before we would necessarily know that we actually had the money. And then the proposal that we actually sent to 4J says $4.5 million to preserve the grandstands, contingent on these two things happening, and that we would let 4J know by January, I think it's the 27th, a week from Monday, whether those contingencies have been met.
So we have until January.
Well, the people have until next Friday
Friday.
to get the money, because we committed that we will let 4J know January 27th that the contingencies have been met, and And that, what I had been envisioning is that we would let 4J know that morning of January 27th.
And the only thing that I have said is, to me, if the money never shows up, it doesn't make sense to spend time examining a business plan for something that we're not, doesn't come with what we've told them it has to come with. So that's up to you guys, of course, but that was my take on it, and I expressed my confusion about why you would spend a long time looking at plans with it that didn't have all the parts that we were requesting. So that's just my particular...
And Mayor, as you said earlier, the only reason why this work session was scheduled today is because we thought that Alan wasn't going to be at a meeting next week.
All right. So I'm going to turn to George Poling.
Yeah, I don't know which direction we're going on this, but whatever course we do decide to take as far as any future discussions, I don't want to see us cause 4J to have to go through another delay. We've been dancing around this issue for years. People in the community have known this property's been available for years. It's, to me, if there was this magical group that George Brown keeps referring to, why haven't they stepped forward? Why haven't they identified themselves? We keep hearing these vague references about reputable groups and big money pocket people, but we've never identified who they are, so how do we know they even exist? The important thing is that 4J is able to move on with their schedule on disposing of this property in the way they want to, and I think we've already mucked up the waters too much, and we should just continue on the course that we've set forth.
Well, before I turn to Alan, my only observation is that 4J was asked if they wanted to extend the time, and they said no, so I think there is no, I don't think that's in our hands.
Very good.
Alan.
So I understand what we did and why we did it, and I agree with your sense of this, Mayor, which is if the folks that want to talk to us about a business plan don't have money behind that plan, then I'm not sure that it's a good use of our time to hear that plan. But having said that, if there are folks, and I understand Coach Lanana and some other folks in town are very interested in using this property to potentially build an indoor track and also preserve the stadium. And if from a business person's perspective, if I were interested in that and I had the wherewithal to do all of that, and I think that those people do, then I didn't like the council's terms, I would step forward and say, I'm interested in doing this. I think this can work. I have the ability to make it happen, but I don't like your terms. Can we renegotiate those? And if I were in their shoes, that's what I would do, and I still think they have time to do that. But I think they need to step forward and say, yes, we're real. Yes, we have the wherewithal. Yes, we have the vision to create this into a soccer stadium and an indoor track venue and entertainment venue, and then we can have a conversation about whether or not what we've done is actually the appropriate thing to do, and whether or not. A question I have for Glenn maybe is the way that we structured our proposal to 4J says that our offer is contingent on these things happening. And if we were to change that contingency, would it be required that 4J would have to accept that contingency before change that contingency for it to still be a valid offer?
If we wanted to change any part of our offer, then yes, 4J would have to accept it, in part because 4J hasn't yet accepted the offer that we've made. Mm-hmm. The reason for the contingencies business plan and $5.5 million was really to protect the city. Right. From 4J's perspective, we'd have to ask the board whether it mattered to them, if you decided not to have any contingencies at all, would that matter to 4J? As long as we didn't change the $4.5 million and we didn't change we're going to preserve the grandstands, and part of the proposal and part of what Fort J talked about was if you're going to preserve, if you're trying to get points for preserving the grandstands, then expect to see something like a deed restriction that says you have to preserve the grandstands. Would it matter to 4J whether you change the $5.5 million or the business plan? I haven't had that conversation with 4J. If the council did that, then we'd say, okay, 4J, now here's what we really want to do. So I don't have that answer because I haven't talked to 4J.
I just want to clarify while we're talking about that we will be meeting with 4J tonight at 7 o'clock. So we've been invited to give our second presentation. In anticipation, this is tonight, and then on the 31st, Terry Berman will be presenting his recommendation to the 4J School Board, and they're scheduled to deliberate and take action on that over February 5th and 19th. So tonight would be a night that we would need to let them know we were changing something. Or it would be a good night to let them know we were changing something.
Heads up.
Yeah.
So I think that the way that we did this is, it is kind of onerous. And if someone were to come back to us with a bona fide offer that we thought was legitimate, that structured this differently, I'd be certainly open to hearing what that would be, what that would look like. Doesn't necessarily have to be exactly like this, but if it meets all the things that we're trying to accomplish with this, which is that they are legitimate, that they have the money, that they're committed to maintaining, renovating, and the stadium and the property, then I'd be willing to talk about that with someone. But I think they have to step forward.
Councilor Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, yes, I think what Councilor Zelenka just said is very sensible, mirrors my feelings exactly, and I'd like to point out, suggest that to the Director of Planning and Development that you at least inform 4J that Council is considering amending our contingencies. At least that we may change. I can't say for certain whether that a majority would support that or not. It kind of depends on hearing from these other people. But it would be great if you could at least mention that to them. And
George, I think you'd have to pass a motion because the motion that's currently in place is what it is, and
No,
it
to
doesn't offer any other flexibility. So.
well, my understanding is what's happening today is basically the best and final offer phase of the development project. They may not have named it so, but that's common in development proposals, and so that each proposer is allowed one last chance to modify or, their proposals. It's not. I don't know that we have to pass a motion for that. I mean, it's a distinct possibility. Two councilors have already said that. Why do we have to have a motion to say that maybe we might make another amendment? I mean, it seems kind of silly to me.
So I think
Perhaps the attorney could shed some light on that.
I think they could say maybe, but they couldn't say you were going to change it because
Well, that's all that I
there's no sense
said.
of-
That's all that I said. Just to say, in a brief, 2 sentences or 3 sentences, that there was discussion at council today. Council may next Wednesday amend the motion describing the contingencies.
Yes.
That's all
Absent.
proposing here.
Oh, sorry.
That's all I'm proposing here.
Absent the council passing a motion, my advice to Sarah will be to not say that. 4J can certainly read about whatever the RG chooses to print. But to tell 4J, the council may change something, will invite a bunch of questions from the 4J board that neither Sarah nor I will be able to answer. We'll change it in what way? Business plan, $5.5 million, how you're going to use the stadium, and our only answer could be, our offer is $4.5 million, we will preserve the grandstands, because that's what the council has done. So adding the language, George, that you're talking about, I think would not present the city's offer in the best light, and it would invite questions that we just can't answer. So if there is some kind of statement that the council as a whole, well, a majority of you, would like Sarah to offer, then my recommendation is that you pass a motion saying, okay, Sarah, at the meeting, please inform 4J that the council has said X. If a majority of you won't say that, then it doesn't work for Sarah to say, here's what the council may do, because we don't know that.
So maybe it's better if I send them an email and just, I communicate with them fairly frequently, and I mean, it's reality. We discussed it as a possibility, as a mere possibility, and I kind of see what you're saying, but the other part of me is a little puzzled why this is such a big deal. It's just, it's a business. This is people talk openly when they're doing development projects. So I don't know that I'll make the motion. They don't have to know that from you. I can just send them an email later. The reason, I'm really puzzled why this is a big deal, and I like Councilor Zelenka's idea, and I'd like to respond to something that Councilor Poling said, the gist of which is, well, people have known about this for years, and why hasn't anybody stepped up with deep pockets? The reason no one stepped up is we passed this motion 49 days ago and committed the city for the first time in this whole long drawn-out process to make a purchase offer. We had not done that prior to 49 days ago. So who's going to step up if they don't know what's on offer? And step up to the city with the business plan. I'm actually thrilled that 2 business plans have already been submitted, and I'm hoping that 2 more will be submitted by reputable people also who, given these, these.
George, you want another round?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Claire?
Thank you. So my feeling is that I don't think we have the support at this table to change the contingency plans today, and I would not like sending staff to a meeting of the sort they are going to with that kind of uncertainty. So my recommendation right now is that we don't mess with our motion, that we let staff go to the meeting and make the presentation as they've been planning on the motion that we passed. However, I agree with Councilor Zelenka that if folks have serious business plans and they're pulling funding together, now is the time we need to see the cash. This is where it's time to step up. And it's possible that we have created a poison pill with the contingencies that we've put there. But unfortunately, that's the position that we're in, and that's the reality right now. Then it could be that there might be a change next week if someone steps forward with a significant offer that comes close to meeting what our contingencies are. We may want to reconsider our contingencies then. But I think for today, I would prefer sitting with the motion that we have, seeing what next week brings.
Betty?
Did you have
I'll pass.
Thank you. I think next Wednesday is too late for us to, if we have this pretend offer that depends on so much money, that isn't a real offer. That is, and I think next Wednesday is too late to say that we really want to purchase the property. I think we should today decide to remove the requirement for the money if we're serious about purchasing it.
My only comment is I think that when we, as a group, not everybody agreeing, came to the decision that we came to last time, it was, from my point of view, it was premised on the fact that we needed to have some guarantee of funds for renovation, maintenance, and operation. And I personally didn't feel like it was going to be fiscally responsible for us to do this, as much as I would like to see the renovation happen if there isn't any there to do it with, and we're not in the position to do it ourselves. So I don't like that. I wish it were different, but that is, in my view, the way it is. And the only thing that I said this is just me, not anybody else, because we haven't talked about it, is that I would be willing to consider payment over a period of time as long as there's a locked-in guarantee that the funds would come in over time. I would be willing to extend that time, but not to have somebody say they're going to do it and then not do it. I would have to be guaranteed that it would come in. I would be open to that kind of flexibility to make it easier on people to comply. In any case, I know it's a big mountain, but it's always been a big mountain. It was a big mountain for us. And if I had my druthers, it would be so. But I do very much hope that people will find a way to put something together that we'll be able to support. But we haven't seen it yet. And it's just the way it is. So, George, you're like.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, I think what you just said was very sensible, by the way. I'd just like to ask the city manager and the director of planning and development and all the counselors, what other public-private partnership project have we entered into imposing conditions like these on our proposed partners? Here's what we've said. 49 days ago, we said, look, you have to come up with $5.5 million. We can't tell you what it's all for. You have to put it in an escrow account that the city controls, and you have to do it in 60 days. And you have to go to your equity partners, your lender, your bank, and your business partners, and you have to develop a fully fleshed out business plan in every detail, and it all has to be perfect, and you have exactly 60 days to do it. Please name one project where we've imposed conditions like that on the developer. We've never done that before. It's unrealistic. I'm telling you, the people that I've mentioned, the two groups, they're talking with their partners now and their lenders, and they are coming up with a plan. And I think it'll be credible because they're both very reputable groups with very wide experience and some capitalization. So they're going to, here's the position that we've put them in by not thinking this through fully. They have to go to their bank and say, well, gee, we'd like to borrow $5.5 million. The banker, what's their first question? Well, yeah, great. What's it for? And they're going to say, well, we know what $3 million's for. That's from a really experienced construction company, worldwide construction company. We know that's for the renovation of the stadium and the field. We can't tell you what the other $2.5 million's for because we don't know. We're just supposed to park that in an escrow account for the city to use however they wish. And we don't. And by the way, we don't know what we're going to get out of it because we haven't negotiated what the full terms of the agreement. And we only have 60 days to get it all together. What do you think the banker's going to say to them? They're going to say, forget it. And if I worked at that bank, I would do the same thing. So, I agree with Councilor Surratt and the mayor and Councilor Zelenka that we should not talk about, amending our motion today. We should do that next Wednesday. Devote next Wednesday's meeting for that discussion, and we'll have learned more things in between. And I would like at least one more round, Mayor.
Councilor Evans.
I don't mean to be argumentative, Councilor Brown, but I would say this, is that there were 5 of us at this table that voted for this motion on the 27th. That's, as far as I'm concerned, is the deal. That's our story, and I'm sticking to it. If anything that we do here, we will be vacillating, looking wishy-washy, and we will lose significant credibility if we start monkeying around with all of this stuff. This is the deal that we said. This is the bar that we set. And to follow up what Councilor Poling said, I've talked to a number of people, soccer people, some of the rest of you in this audience, and my question was at that time, you knew about this 3 years ago. If there's going to be something that is going to have actually have teeth and legs to it, and it's going to take some form and shape, then that should probably have taken place over the last 3 years. But since, in lieu of the fact that it didn't, there are other people that are stepping up, have other proposals. If this is where we are, this is where I'm staying as far as the city offer is concerned. And I don't think that we should change or amend those contingencies that we have put in place.
Claire?
Yeah, thank you. I'm in support of trying to save Civic. That's why I've been supporting these motions. But in this particular instance, I kind of feel Councilor Brown's characterization is a little unfair towards the City Council. We were lobbied by folks who said, please, please, please make an offer. We're standing by, waiting to partner and come forward with viable business plans. And we've got folks who are going to bring forward money. I didn't imagine that they were going to be going to find bank loans. I really expected there would be angel investors that would be approached. And, there are some big pockets in this state who might be approached, whether they want to do it publicly or not, by some of the folks who've come and lobbied us. So I feel we were put in a position to take this action, and we responded. A majority of us responded, but it was not full consensus on this council to do this, to take this action, to even be having this conversation. So we created the contingency because we are simply in a financial position where we cannot, as a city, take on the responsibility to renovate the stadium. As much as some of us might like to do that, we are also having budget hearings on proposing service cuts, and we had park bond money available to purchase the property, and so I supported that. But in terms of ongoing renovation and maintenance, we do not have the capacity for that. And so we created the contingencies in order to make an effort to create some room for those folks who want to save the stadium to come forward and do that. I think we're doing our part, and we're doing it as well as we can under the circumstances.
Councilor Brown, and then we're going to, I'm sorry, Betty, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. Thank you. I think in response to not changing what we decided, if you do something that's impossible or wrong, then it is a good thing to change, to reconsider. I thought that we were asking for way too much money in the beginning, but as for people having money, I don't think that, I've never had that kind of money, but I don't think it's available just to reach in your pocket and say, here it is. I think it takes time, even if you do have wealth, it takes time to access it, I think. And if we need to have something there something concrete for people to invest in before we ask them to. And I don't think that anyone is thinking we would use our general funds to rehabilitate or maintain the stadium. We do have the park money with which we can buy it, and that opens it up for people to do some very good things. And I think that it's wisdom to trust the people to be able to judge who can be trusted. And I think we have very trustworthy people who assure us that they can do something with this, that they can get the money when we have it ready to use. As for vacillating, it's vacillating if we say we'll buy it if something happens, I think, in my opinion. I think we should say we will buy it, but obviously there aren't enough votes here. Thank you.
George?
Thanks, Mayor. Well, just briefly, I'd like to respond to Councilor Surratt's comments. And, I understand, I think I understand the spirit in which we passed that last motion. But, the motion didn't say, calling all white knights out there, this is your last chance. It said, you know what I mean? And we didn't issue an RFP. So the only guideline a potential proposer or developer has is that motion. And it says, come up with $5.5 million in 60 days or else. That's all it says. There's, it's the sketchiest thing imaginable. I understand the spirit with which it was done, and I commend that. That's why I supported it. But, it was really those two things. It's like, barring a white knight, it's impossible, basically, to fulfill those requirements in 60 days. Groups, development groups, sport groups, soccer groups, track groups can do this, but they want to know, they need more specific guidance about the required amount of money, and they need to know, the 60-day contingency is pretty hard. I know of one group that was interested. They're a development company in Portland. They were interested in purchasing or leasing a section. The reason I know is because one of their associates who lives here in town, who has, by the way, worked with Peter Powell before on another project, I believe it was in Wyoming. That's why I know about this. They didn't even submit a proposal because they looked at this and they said, well, it's just crazy. 60 days, it's not enough time to present our proposal. And they were in a lease or purchase a portion of the property. So, I think I'll just leave it at that. But, what I would like to ask as fellow counselors to do between now and next Wednesday, if you haven't already been doing so, is just ask some of your friends in the development community or the banking community, the real estate community. Ask them what they think about these contingencies, and if they would enter into try to put a deal together in 60 days. Don't ask them whether they like the idea of purchasing the property, whether they like the idea of the project. That's immaterial, because some will say, well, yeah, it's a great idea. Others will say, no, it's a worthless idea, don't do it. Just ask them about the contingencies that we've imposed on ourselves and on potential proposers. Just ask them what they think about that. Thank you.
So unless I hear otherwise, I believe the consensus around the table is not to hear from the folks that have put in the two business proposals. We'll wait until the 22nd when we know whether we actually have some funding involved. And Betty, did you want
I
to?
think if people have come here thinking they're going to talk to us, we should listen if they've spent their time.
Would you like to put a motion out?
Okay, I move that we listen to people who want to talk to us.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please indicate. All those in opposition? 6 in opposition and 2 for it doesn't move forward. All right. So the only other comment I'll make before we move on to the next topic is actually the 60 days came because people said we need I think they actually said they needed that amount of time. If we had that amount of time, that would give them enough time to come forward with something. And so that is why we came up with that amount of time. And I just want to point out that on one hand, you may hear that we have our nose too much in this deal that the school district is doing. On the other hand, it's like we don't have our nose in enough. But I think there's limitations on what we can do because it's not our property, and we are only one of the people who are out there with proposals, and we're in the position of having a proposal. We're not in the position of being the property owners at this point, and we have not made a decision to be the property owners unless we get that and under certain conditions. So if that's the situation we're in, that's the reality. All right, we're going to move on now. So, thank you. Next up is a work session on the joint meeting with the Police Commission. Yes, sir.
That was under.
My intended motion.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Can we do that?
Yeah, you have good time to do it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As I advised on Monday night, I was going to bring a motion onto the table, and I'll go ahead and make a motion and then speak to it real briefly if I get a second. And so I move to schedule a work session on or before Wednesday, February 12, 2014, to deliberate on initiating a process to amend the Metro Plan diagram to designate 955 Coburg Road as low-density residential. The deliberations shall be canceled if the property owner and the LUBA appellant agree to a settlement in the pending LUBA appeal of the zone change for 955 Coburg Road before the scheduled work session.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Thank you. This is similar to what Alan proposed when we had this discussion is to do a work session to deliberate initiating it. This basically follows through on that motion, but kind of gives us a little bit of leeway. It would also make sure that the council would be able to clarify the designation of the property, at least which direction we're leaning, before the owner began construction, because it might present some problems. I've been told that the Planning Commission was told by staff that they hope to delay the council from holding a work session until after the LUBA rules on the current appeal. But if that happens, it'll be too late, because then the permits can be applied for, and construction might be able to begin. There's been a draft ordinance similar to the one that we used back in 2006 for the Jefferson Westside neighbors that's been submitted to the staff, and basically that did some redesignation, basically as a housekeeping due to some either errors or oversights at the time during the process. So, and this also gives about 4 weeks for the property owner and the neighbors who are the appellant in the LUBA appeals. Since they're close to making a settlement, it'll give them some time to work out the finer details of the settlement, and it still gives us the option of moving forward with my original idea if the settlement is not reached. And again, I'm doing this on behalf of a request by the Harlow Neighborhood Associations and the neighbors, the numerous neighbors that have signed a petition wanting to keep that or designate that property as R1.
City Manager, is there any issue with this date?
That's a bump.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was looking for my council agenda, and for some reason, I don't have it with me, so.
I just happen to carry mine.
Oh, I normally do too. It will bump something. I don't know what it will bump, so we will just have to decide what gets bumped through this.
All right. Further discussion? Councilor Zelenka and then Councilor Pryor.
So, if I got this right, George, the urgency stems from the fact that if a work session occurs after the LUBA decision, then there's a possibility of permits being applied for and issued, and construction beginning. Construction probably not in the near term, but that's the permit for probably the more significant part. But us initiating a metro plan change doesn't change that, does it? It's still, I mean, the initiation of a metro plan doesn't say, okay, now there's no permits that can be issued on this particular property. It's still, until we actually change the metro plan.
Correct. The initiation of a metro plan amendment has no legal significance in terms of how the property can be used. The legal significance comes after the council has taken final action.
And if LUBA comes down with an opinion in the interim before we initiate a process and actually get through the end of it, which would be maybe a year, and a lot of work, and LUBA comes down and makes a decision, how would that impact what we would do in terms of an initiation of a metro plan amendment?
A LUBA decision on the pending appeal would not have any direct effect on the council's adoption or denial of a metro plan amendment. LUBA is dealing with, as I recall, a rezoning question. So the council would still legally be able to either follow through and, well, complete the process and change or not change. And I think what George may be talking about is if the standards in place that control development of that property are changed after a building permit is issued, then those changes don't invalidate the building permit that's been issued. But a LUBA appeal also, the existence of a LUBA appeal does not legally prevent the property owner from obtaining a building permit based on the action that the Planning Commission already took. Unless LUBA issues a stay of the Planning Commission's action, the Planning Commission's action is final, and people can go get a building permit based on that. Those are the general rules. I don't know enough about this specific development proposal to know whether there's something unusual that would vary it from the normal course. So the existence of a LUBA appeal it's a risk potentially for the property owner, and so most people will not go get building permits if there's a pending LUBA appeal, but legally they could.
And if, after the LUBA decision, and say the property owner won that case at LUBA, the next day they could go and apply for a permit, regardless of our initiation of a Metro Plan amendment.
Correct, but they could also apply for a permit the day before the LUBA appeal is final. And my guess is that whoever loses at LUBA will appeal to the Court of Appeals. If that makes any difference in your calculation.
Well, it just makes it go out and out and out and out.
Right.
So I guess I'm not understanding the urgency of this, because it doesn't seem to make any difference when we actually act. And I guess I'm having a problem understanding why this, given all that conversation, and it doesn't really matter when we act, why this would take precedence over all the other 15 things that we have that are already stacked up in the agenda, including work sessions and other things that councilors have put to poll. So maybe you can address that, George.
Well, I think the big thing is that this shouldn't take, an actual Metro Plan amendment should not take as long as a normal one would, because of the amount of information that is available that, in my opinion, can justify a housekeeping type approach to it because of either oversights or errors or just a lot of rushing going on by staff back in 92, was it? 1992, that created this. And I think that it's the neighbors' desire that they don't want three-story apartments right in their backyards. And this is what this negotiation is. They're trying to come to an agreement on the development of the property under its current zoning. And if the agreement can be reached, I think that the LUBA appeal, well, I know the Metro Plan amendment won't be necessary. So what the neighbors are asking for is at least an idea or a sense of which direction the council is leaning toward taking any action in reference to the zoning of that property.
So I'm going to interrupt here and say that we have the police commission waiting. We're 5 minutes into their time, so I'm hoping we're going to either take this up later, if it's going to be an extended conversation, or we're going to move fast here, because they've been sitting here through half the meeting already.
Well, I'll leave it at final comment, which is I don't have a problem with the motion except for bumping it ahead of all these other things. I don't necessarily see the urgency of it. I do support, as I said before, having a conversation about whether or not we should have a Metro Plan amendment and have that conversation occur, but I know that needs to occur before February 12th. So if you take that as a friendly amendment, make February 12th as soon as possible, I would consider supporting it.
Councilor Pryor.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm aware of the time, so I'll try to speak fast. I don't think anyone has a problem with holding the work session, because it would be very helpful to find out kind of more background about it. I've had a chance to talk to councilors that served on the council at the time this was passed, and I think there would be some additional insight for why that property is the way it is and what was the intention of the council at that time. The question then becomes, is this important enough to bump things for? One thing that also, and I think George was alluding to it, is the Luba appeal, plus the fact that, and this is a bit of an incentive, I think, the neighbors are in active negotiation with the property owner to try to reach an agreement. And if the council were to schedule the work session, I think that would clarify for these folks that they want and need to reach an agreement as sooner rather than later. I'm hopeful that this work session item wouldn't take an enormous amount of time, so I'm in favor of going ahead and supporting it, not liking the fact that it might have to bump something, but the fact that it might encourage the negotiation, which would result in the withdrawal of an appeal. We could hopefully dispose of this item relatively quickly with some insight from other counselors. So I don't think we should make a practice of just moving stuff around in the list, but in this case, there's an attendant benefit of causing some negotiations to work more effectively and an agreement to be reached. So I'm willing to support it, but I'm not going to always support these kinds of things.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. And to take off on what Chris said, the importance of that issue of urgency is its capacity to aid in the process of a settlement. And the settlement means we don't have to act in order to begin the process of what will certainly be, I think, a successful attempt, and from my opinion, should happen, to change the Metro Plan. That will be expensive, and that will take time and effort away from staff's other work that I'd like to see us save. So merely by scheduling this and saying yes, we give the folks involved in this the highest opportunity to settle of their own accord, and thus take it off of our plate and save us the expense.
So if we're not ready to vote now, I'm going to ask you to put it off because we're 5 minutes into the police commission's time.
Call the question.
Call the question.
Call the question. Somebody call the question?
Yes.
I call the question.
Second that.
All right, so calling the question means that is that non-debatable, or we just,
Non-debatable, take 6 votes to close debate.
okay, all in favor of calling the question, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I guess we're there. Okay, so all those in favor of the motion, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, we're there. Thank you.
Mayor, now that the council has said it's going to initiate, or it's going to have the conversation about initiating, if any of you have conversations with anybody about this, I think you need to, and I don't mean physically tape record the conversations, but you need to start keeping track of those conversations, because I can see somebody saying those constitute ex-parte communications, and so you'll need to divulge before any public hearing what those communications are. I'm not talking about what happened before this meeting, but anything that happens after this meeting. If you have a conversation with anybody about this, please keep track of it, and at some point we'll ask you to state those for the record.
Thank you.
All right, let's quickly make a transition here and ask our police commission folks to come up.
Thank you.
Welcome, welcome, everybody.
Why don't you all just
Just do this. The manager?
I'll just turn it over. I'm not sure which one of you is leading us off, so.
Yes, I will. Good afternoon, council members and Madam Mayor. I am Bob Walker. I'm the chairman of the Police Commission, and this is Tamara Miller. She is our vice chair. I would also like to take a moment to recognize the members of the commission who came today and our staff people. I'll start with our staff persons in the back. Most of you know and love Carter Hawley, who supports us and helps us through the meetings, and Matt Lowen, who is the policy analyst, policy sergeant for the city of Eugene. And with me here today is Joe Tyndall, James Manning, and Bill Whalen, 3 of our commissioners. I want to also take time to recognize 2 other commission members who happen to sit here, and that's Mike Clark and Claire Surratt, who serve as our council people from the commission. And I thank them for their guidance many times. They've helped us with the bureaucratic process and how it works, so thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to our vice chair at this time, who's going to outline our progress so far since our last report.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here today to speak to you. If you recall, back in July of 2013, the Police Commission brought forward our FY14, FY15 work plan, which was approved by the council. So we're just here today to talk to you about our FY13 work that was accomplished and let you talk to you about any details or have any discussion you want to have about the 2014-15 two-year work plan that the commission has had approved. So in your packet today is our FY13 year-end report. So I'm not going to go over all of the detail of that. Our annual work plan is structured in a way that sets forth the goals of the police commission, and it is structured in that manner throughout the report here. So goal 1 was to ensure that the policies and procedures of the Eugene Police Department protect the civil rights and liberties of everyone in Eugene. And to meet that goal, the Police Commission, through its Policy Screening Committee and the work of the full commission, worked on several policies, one of which was related to the safety of people in custody. And we made recommendations on that police policy. It was a new policy. The police had not previously had a policy on that subject. As Work Plan Objective 1.2, to meet that goal, the Police Commission held discussions at the January and March Police Commission meetings in 2013 and received recommendations on changes to the domestic violence policies of the department. Our second goal was to promote policing that respects Eugene's rich culture and diversity. We worked very hard to schedule a joint forum with the U of O. We had several meetings for planning that forum with the U of O, but the timing didn't work out for that. That was just about the time that the university had announced they were going to be arming their police department, their newly formed police department, and they wanted to spend their time with their students in public forums on that subject rather than on having a joint forum with the police commission. So we're still hoping that in the future, when things settle down for them, that we'll be able to capture a public forum with that segment of our community, which has not, there's not been a lot of participation or a discussion with the student population. It's a large part of our community, so we're hoping to do something still in that regard in the future. As Objective 2.2, the commission, there's a list here in that section of your report about the policies that the police commission worked on in FY13. I'm not going to go through all of those unless there's questions about that. As goal 3, we had increased communications, understanding, and trust between the police and the people in Eugene. Work on Objective 3.1. We held a State of Public Safety Forum in June 27th, 2013, and that public forum included members of the municipal court, the police department, the sheriff's department, and several other folks, and that forum included public participation as well. Work Plan Objective 3.2, and we had received comment and decided to work on a subject, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this, about how to better respond to public comments in a meeting. That's just an ongoing discussion. We've had several format changes under our former chair, Caitlin Lang, where we tried different formats, we tried different things. Our committees of the Police Commission always have had, public comment at the beginning, and then we've had community dialogue at the end. You'll see in our 14-15 work plan that we've discontinued those committees for just work efficiency reasons, but those were in place in FY13. We have experimented a little bit with other formats. It's a difficult balance to strike just because you want to hear from the public, you want to respond back, but as you well know, you also have work objectives that you need to accomplish, and that can eat up your meeting time wholly if you let it. So it's a balancing act, and we'll continue looking for ways to creative ways and trying out different formats to respond better to public comments received in our meetings. Work Plan Objective 3.3 was joint meetings with the Civilian Review Board and the Human Rights Commission, and we held both of those meetings in FY13. The Human Rights Commission joint meeting included discussion on the downtown public safety zone recommendations by the task force that was tasked with finding alternatives to that downtown public safety zone when it was being sunsetted. Goal 4 was encourage problem solving and partnerships between people, neighborhoods, and other agencies and police. And as a part of meeting that goal, again, it was the public safety forum that we held on June 27th. And we also met with planners of the gang symposium, which we were hoping to do something with hate crimes this in FY13. We felt that it maybe fit in with the gang symposium that was held in this community in FY13. The organizers of that gang symposium did take what our suggestion to include a definition of gangs in hate crimes and in their work for that symposium, but we didn't pursue that as a separate work plan item for that reason. And then as Goal 5, provide fair opportunities for the public and criminal justice professionals to comment and participate in the Commission's work, recognizing the interconnectedness of criminal justice system. And those two objectives, again, were met by the public safety forum that was held, and also the domestic violence discussion that we had in our January and March Police Commission meetings. So are there any questions about our work that was done in 2013 by the counselors? If not, I'll turn the time over to Bob to talk about our work for the next 2 years.
Thank you, Tamara. We did, Tamara touched on at least one issue that we did change drastically in our work plan for this year, and that's the elimination of the outreach and also the policy screening and review commission. We have scheduled work sessions before all of our commission meetings now just to deal with the issues on policy. And what has happened is we're getting a greater base of input because more people are coming to the police commission meeting and they give their input and we hear from them. That informs us on how the community wants to deal with some of these police issues. In addition to that, when the committees before were doing their work, we always had to bring it back to the commission for approval and naturally and vote. And other commissioners who were not on the committee had their own opinions, and we ended up substituting things in the commission meetings anyway. So it seemed a more efficient process, and I must admit it has worked well since then. The outreach projects can be handled in an ad hoc basis as we need them. So although we've eliminated the standing committee, we still have and have just created, I might say, a ad hoc committee to deal with the issue that we're now dealing, which is bias-based policing in the police department. We have formed a subcommittee that will hear from a panel of experts. We have already heard from different groups in the community who have shown up at our commission meeting and expressed their concerns. Again, this helps us understand what the issues are out in the community, how they feel and perceive the police are handling stops and contacts with other people. And we give that kind of weight to our considerations and our deliberations when we make policy for the police department. Our policies are submitted, as you know, to the police chief, and he has the option to do that which he wishes to do with them. But they are our policies. They are not the city's policy that we review. It's more a situation where the commissioners put forth what they feel policy should say. So I think we have a very good voice in that regard. I'm happy to say that we have, and I've seen the process work. It's actually an honor and a privilege to serve in a commission that does such good work, and I know that the city is a better place because of the commission, so I thank you all. Just getting back to this just for a moment, the shift in focus now is the issues related to police department are the biggest community concern, and we formed a list of the largest concerns at our retreat. And for the last 2 years, we have brought out that we would like to submit our biannual plan to City Council, and we have done that at this last retreat. We voted to do that. But we are still reviewing our work plan quarterly. At each quarter, we go over the goals and the points that we brought up at the retreat and see which ones we have done. So briefly, let me touch on those. We've already had, this is the issues to be considered this year. Information on police contacts with different demographics and the databases that are needed to assess them. The department is getting ready to start a study this summer on police stops and how the bias and racial impacts of that are being seen in the results of their statistics. We have already begun the work on that to try to inform them of how we'd like to see the policy work. Serving immigrant populations, services to and public safety issues related to homelessness. We've already held a major forum on that. We've had a homeless person, we've had business people, we've had people from the charitable communities that served on that panel, and I thought it was a very good response from the public that we got after we spoke with each one of these people, and they told us how they feel and how they see the situation. Police services in light of the budget, crime reduction in light of the jail and prison shortcuts, which I haven't read recently, may have been eased somewhat, I hope. Use of force, constitutional privacy, drones, automatic license plate readers, advocacy for police and safety resources, Eugene police policies, which is an ongoing process. We do that regularly. Police budget allocation and grants, strategy for public safety funding, police training manual, something we hadn't got into before, and how the training works. We attended recently a training put on by several members of the commission, by Captain Sam Kamkar with the police department, on how they train their officers to prevent bias in their stops and in their dealing with the public. We also wanted to respond to emerging issues as they come up. So we have time set out in our program to review that as things come up that are important to the community. We hope to respond to those. Again, that pretty much sums up what our plan is for the following year, and I'm glad to entertain any questions anybody might have.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate seeing the services and public safety issues related to homelessness, because that was having a look at what our laws are was on a list of things that came out of the Mayor's Committee on Homelessness, and we've had so many other things we've been dealing with, we haven't gotten to that, but it's very important, and it's appreciate that you seem to be stepping up to it. So, yes.
I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you and acknowledge the wonderful and hard work that the Police Commission members put in. Councilor Clark and I are required to show up at these meetings. You all simply volunteer. And I just have to say, even before in my prior work, I would be attending Police Commission meetings on a regular basis, and consistently all the way through, I believe you guys bring such a great value, such good thinking, very much thinking through things, not just from your own personal perspective, but what is the larger community thinking about these things. And you do it all without hardly any recognition or notice, and so I want to take this opportunity to notice and recognize and thank you and the other members who couldn't be here today, and I really appreciate those of you who were able to come and be part of our meeting in the middle of a workday. And along those lines, I also very much appreciate the efforts that the Police Commission has historically put into trying to accommodate public comment and bring public comment into so many parts of your work. And frankly, I think you go above and beyond what your actual obligation is as a commission to do that, because you are all members of the public who are bringing that perspective to the table. So unlike a council, which I think has an extra obligation to allow members of the public to come and speak to us, you are already bringing a public perspective there. So not to discourage you from doing that outreach, but just know that from my perspective, you are more than fulfilling that part of your charge. So thanks so much for all the work that you're doing.
Councilor Clark?
What she said. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to commend the commission on the work that they've done, and I think that's been excellent. It's had a positive effect in terms of police policy, particularly as it regard to racial harassment. I can give you an anecdotal situation in which someone in the community approached me about a couple moving into Whitaker, and they were subsequently harassed by their neighbors to the point where their home was vandalized. And the response of the police department was very positive and abated the situation without having to go to any kind of further, criminal kind of process or whatever the case may be. But I think that it's working. I have one question. Who is going to be conducting the survey with regard to the demographics as far as contacts are concerned? Is that going to be internal, or is there going to be an external party that's going to do that?
Well, I can speak to the commission's part, Mr. Evans, that would be we have appointed a subcommittee. Juan Carlos Valle is a member of the commission. He is going to head that subcommittee, and they are going to pick panel people from the community who will inform them, and then they will come back to us. We have a due date of March to get this done because we have to provide enough time to allow the police chief, when he begins his survey, to be able to incorporate what we recommend into his survey as well. So they'll be conducting. He also has formed his own panel of experts from the community, from all different walks of life, to help inform him on how he wants to do this collection.
I would just like to add that this is related to new software that the department has acquired. I don't know if you knew that or not. Carter, did we say anything wrong about that? Okay.
I've talked to the chief. I'm aware that there's a new software package that tracks the demographics of police stops and all of that kind of thing, and those particular interactions. I'm anxious to see how that works once it's implemented. So hopefully when you guys come back next year, we'll have something to report on that.
Yes, I won't be back next year because my term ends on 7/1.
Councilor Lincoln, then Councilor Pryor, and then Councilor Surratt.
Well, I thought you were on for life.
I'll second that motion.
That's too bad. Thank you for your work on this, on the police commission, all of you. It's important to have community input on the police department. I like the shift in focus to the community issues. Of the list here, the top three for me would be contacts and issues related to homelessness, and also drones. And specifically on that last one, drones, it's been in the news lately, and Oregon apparently a test area for this, potentially. And I guess what specifically are you going to take up on drones? Are you going to take up the potential use of drones by EPD?
I think, that's the intent of at least one council member one commission member who brought this up. And the concern is, where to draw the line on what they will use it for and how the invasion of individual rights and privacies and those types of things, how that might impact people in the community. And I think that's the idea. If the Eugene Police Department ever gets the money to purchase one, which is probably not, how would it be used, and what type of policy would we see from the police?
Well, I don't necessarily think it's Eugene Police Department paying for one. I think the issue really would be if the feds gave us one. Mm-hmm. And the issue I think you guys should take up and would be interested to report back to the council would be, should we accept that and use a drone? And whether or not we should do that, and if so, under what circumstances. Drones are intriguing and troubling at the same time for me. So I think that the primary question, should we even do it, is something you guys should discuss at the beginning of that, I hope. And then Councilor Evans was talking about the new software. And so are we going to get a report back on this, on item one, the contacts and the demographics and the results of what we do?
Yes, the chief's doing an interim, it's going to be an interim policy, and he's doing essentially a pilot project with the data points for a period of time. Is it a year, Carter? To capture, starting this summer, to capture the data points his advisory group and he determine are the appropriate ones that can be captured in that software. There's apparently a lot of data points that can be captured, and they'll probably narrow it down and decide which ones are the appropriate ones for our to be collected as part of this project, and then there will be a report at the end of that by the department.
So what do you hope to accomplish with that and look at that?
Well, the purpose of collecting the data points is to determine whether there is disproportionate racial stops. And so hopefully the data will show that, or if there's adjustments that need to be made in the data points, or the interim policy that directs how that will occur and how those police contacts are made, and that will be shown through the data, is what I think everyone's hoping.
And then, can you talk a little bit more specifically about the homelessness issues, what you guys are going to discuss in that regard?
Well, we've already covered a great deal of territory in that. We've had the forum, we've had the people come and speak to us. There were business people from downtown in the Nikisi Square area who came and spoke about the problems. There was a homeless person who actually gave his perspective and how the police handle the homeless folks in the area. There were people who, like I said, run the charitable businesses that do take care of them and giving their perspective on that, as well as a law enforcement person who gave us the people that work in the downtown area patrol. So we got a very good sense of all of the different aspects of this situation and how. What our focus was on how the laws and the police policies that are used by the police, the laws that are used by the police and their policies, how they impact the homeless people and what kind of changes could be made to the policies. For instance, one would have been trespass. The trespass laws, whether they were being applied unfairly toward homeless people or whether this was just because this is the way the law is, we have to do these things. And things were mentioned like giving warnings to people instead of issuing citations to them, different changes in the policy. And those recommendations were made to the police department, which ultimately make the decision. So how it comes out, sometimes we don't know. But those are what we hope to do, is to bring that discussion to the police department.
Councilor Pryor.
Thank you. I really appreciate the work that you have done before and the work that you're doing now and the work that you'll do in the future. The relationship between a police department and its communities is extremely critical. In some cities it doesn't work at all. In others it works very well. If you've ever looked at a manual transmission, there's a plate attached to the engine and a plate attached to the wheels. And to make the car go, you have to bring those two plates together and not have them rub and create heat and friction and wear. And it's the clutch that allows those two plates to come together perfectly to keep the car moving. I think of the police commission like a clutch, that you have the police department and you have the community, and you could just slam them together and the car wouldn't work very well. You'd have friction, you'd have heat. I can count 13 different points of friction here that could create heat and wear between our police department and our community. You serve as the clutch that allows us to bring those 13 points, to bring that together in a way that will keep this car, that is Eugene, moving forward. That means you have a very critical role in how the community operates and how that relationship between the police department and its community works. Without you, it wouldn't work well. So it becomes important that you make sure that how you deal with these elements stays in fine tune. The clutch doesn't come too high, the clutch doesn't come too low, it works just right. And I think you have done a really good job of making sure that you keep the clutch in the right adjustment so that it doesn't get too far the plate this way or too far the plate that way. The car seems to be moving well with a minimum of heat and friction. So I think that is speaking in positive terms for the plans that you've done up until now. And so I'm encouraged to look at the plan that you're preparing and say, I still think it's keeping this car in adjustment. And so for that, I just wanted to be very complimentary of the kind of balance and nuance that you put into it.
Captain Metaphor strikes again.
I just want to go back to the homeless thing for a minute and say that when they were talking about that in the committee, they were talking about taking a look at our laws and picking some to really hone in on, and then seeing whether any changes needed to be made. And I know that the council has an interest in that, so I don't know how you're going to proceed with that. But I think we're looking for some kind of more sort of systematic way, and I know it can be a lot. So I think it would be, you'd have to figure out what it was that you wanted to pursue. But I think we've sort of said we're going to head down that path. So I'm looking to you to get back to us about what it is that you do some kind of survey of what those laws are. And I know we have a national expert who is volunteered to work with us on that as a community.
And Mira, as you know, the council can also assign work to the police commission. So if there's something that comes up for you don't think we're working on, you're always welcome to assign us.
Bossy, back here. Who was it, a national expert that came and offered to Eric Tars. That's what it was, right, thank you. Eric Tars, right. And Councilor Surratt?
Mayor.
So I just wanted to respond to some of the conversation. In terms of the question of drones, I think Councilor Zelinka's right. If this city's going to get drones, it'll probably be through a grant provided by the federal government. I believe there's folks looking to create a statewide protocol for how drones would be used by law enforcement or other public agencies across the state, so it wouldn't necessarily be up to individual jurisdictions to figure that all out. But that may not happen in time for this community to want to have a policy around that. On the data collection piece, so there's the work that the chief is doing to implement this pilot project, and at first they're only going to be collecting data on traffic stops as part of the rollout to test it. And then the police commission's role is really to vet the topic and to work with the chief or in tandem to create the policy or to vet the policy if the chief brings us one to look at. So I think at some point outside of, since a lot of that work is outside of the jurisdiction of the commission, I think this council should ask Chief Kearns to bring a report to us on the data collection and what he's rolling out when it's appropriate, when he's ready to do that, because folks will have a lot of questions. On the homeless discussion, my understanding is that, so we had some robust panels and discussions. I don't know that we got down into in selecting any particular policies to look at more deeply, and my understanding is we tabled the discussion. Technically it's tabled, and my suggestion had been that there might need to be some more direction from council about what particular policies might you want us to look at that would be helpful for council. And part of that is the commission has a lot on its plate. There's a lot of policies to be looked at. Some of them are policies that the chief is wanting to get cleaned up or in place, and so obviously there's always a competition for time and managing our time. So because it is a broad topic, getting some direction from council about some particulars might be helpful in terms of the commission planning some work around those policies.
And I think, too, we reached a stopping point on some of those things because we were looking at policies which are just about enforcement of the law. The laws themselves, obviously, are something for this council to look at, although we're always happy to do work that's assigned to us by council.
And I'd like to add that we didn't actually table the topic. I think what happened was we had a couple of ideas that people had, but like Tamara said, some of those were law changes that we have no ability to do anything about other than recommend council perhaps. But there was a policy change motion that was made in the commission, and it was to change the trespass policy and procedure from the police department so that people would receive a warning before they received a citation, and that motion failed. It was felt after the discussion that the signs and so forth that say no trespassing would serve as warning, and the members, the majority of members, felt that it wasn't necessary to limit the police to only giving a warning the first time that they could use their discretion. So we had talked about different, that's just an example. There were other parts of policies that we dissected and looked at, and council, I would report to you that we just didn't have a majority of people that felt that any of the policies really needed changing in themselves, but possibly the laws that affect homelessness are always going to be more impactful on the people who are affected by it. Thank you.
Councilor Clark?
Thank you, Mayor. In the last two statements here, covered a great deal of what I wanted to say, which was just that there's a very different set of questions and a different kind of work that's done, and I think is appropriately done in both of the different forums, the Police Commission and the Council. The Police Commission's role properly is to analyze and give community perspective to the chief about the policies by which he and the manager operate the police department and its employees, whereas our ordinance around what's appropriate and inappropriate for the city's policy towards issues related to homelessness, overnight camping, things like that. I'm not sure personally, even though I serve on it, that the Police Commission is the appropriate forum for that discussion. they have the capacity certainly to add the police perspective of what sort of things the police have to deal with, because they're often the first contact in that regard. But if we have questions around the city's ordinance policy towards that come into contact with folks that are homeless, I think that a council discussion more than, and if my colleagues disagree, then I'd certainly welcome them giving more concrete sorts of advice to the commission.
Councilor Brown?
Thanks, Mayor. So when you were discussing in this context of homelessness and the trespassing, powers of the police to deal with that, did you specifically talk about the trespass letters that
Yes.
property owners sign
Yes,
and
that
have
was-
filed
that-
with the police department? Because that I have seen that as an area of conflict and misunderstandings and occasionally potential abuse, whether it's inadvertent or not. So, but you guys did discuss all that. Are your minutes? I hope you still do have a minute taker and.
No, we don't have a minute taker or written minutes
Okay.
anymore. Our budget doesn't allow that. We do have all of our meetings videotaped.
There you go.
And actually, Carter does keep minutes for the meeting. They're brief, they're not in any detail, but you can find, the entire transcript online by
I
going to the
see.
archives and finding the Police Commission archives and finding the videos on there, and it'll give you the whole meeting.
Okay.
But just briefly to respond to you, I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, go
Briefly to
ahead.
respond to you, when the trespass letter was very controversial, and we spent several meetings on it, as I recall, because several people had issues with the fact that we could issue, just by a letter being on file, be able to write someone a summons for being on the property, because without contacting the owner and saying, do you want this person arrested? And there were people that felt that was very helpful, especially business people, who felt that, they didn't want to be woken up at 3 in the morning and asked if they were going to come down to the police station to file a complaint against the person who was trespassing on their property. They felt that they had said that in the letter, and that's what they wanted the police to do. And there were people who said it was unfair because nobody ever had to show up. They go to court, and, the issue was brought up in court, and they were either fined or cited or suspended, a fine or something like that happened to them. So there was ample discussion on that, Mr. Brown, yes, and it was felt that it was adequate the way it was.
I see. Yeah. Well, in a way, it's kind of like someone can be arrested for trespass even though they haven't really committed any other crime other than being on that property, and there's a sign there and a letter on file. They haven't broken into any building or vehicle. They haven't caused destruction of the property in any way. They just happen to be on, walking across a parking lot that somebody owns, or adjacent to a business with a trespass letter, and so I still think that's a controversial, or an area that deserves more study. Put it that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
I did want to add that the commission did make some recommendations to the police about how their trespass letter program works, that how often those are, that they expire, that they would be updated more often, that they would have some regular contact with the property owners to make sure that's what they still wanted, because that's not necessarily the way it's occurred in the past. And there was my recollection is there was a new database that they were putting those letters into that allowed them to better manage those letters and be more diligent about making sure that they were current and accurate, and that the property owner was asked on a regular basis, do you still want to have this trespass letter on file?
Correct. Thank you.
Time to wrap up, Councilor Zelenka?
Two quick questions. One is, do you guys have any interaction with the new University of Oregon Police Department and
No, we haven't.
No, we haven't yet.
okay. Maybe you should. Might be a good idea, since they're kind of in our
Kind of do what they want.
And the second one is that the public safety forum scheduled for June 27th.
No,
That's
that's last year.
upcoming.
No,
or is that
last
year.
last
Okay.
year.
That was last year's public forum. Okay.
There is
Are they
one
going to do that again?
tomorrow night, though.
Well, we can. It was certainly very informative and interesting for the community.
Excuse me for interrupting. I believe they're having one tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night?
5:30 to 7:30 at Chavez Elementary School. And so anybody who might be interested, I plan to go there. Sounds like being interesting.
Communities of color in the police department. Yes.
Right. No,
interaction tomorrow night.
Fourth conflict of the evening, so I'm not going to be able to go.
Yeah, I think Philip Carrasco is organizing that.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Very good.
Human Rights Commission.
You will see me there.
All right, with that, we've hit the magic hour. Thank you so much for
Thank
your
you.
presentation.
Are you going to that?